Hello, this is Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2022. My name is Sam, and for those who are new to the channel, I take a look at all of the playoff games from every particular region that participates in these international events, yes, including that one, and we've been doing a daily look at all of the games that have played so far in MSI, and today we've hit semifinals. The semifinals that, if you saw our podcast, it's long. I don't imagine people did. But if you did see it, take a look at it. It's a good time. We mentioned how these are two very similarly stylistic sets of like best of fives. We've got our late game team fighting scalings and our early game scrappy fighters. And today, we've got the Royal Never Give Up LPL representatives, two-time defending MSI champions versus the upstarts and evil geniuses with their rookies. Or one rookie and one fairly new player. Honestly, didn't expect any competition out of evil geniuses. But they've surprised a little bit. Not a whole lot, a little bit. So let's take a review of some of these games here. Let's start with game one. Starting with game one, where Royal Never Give Up had side selection being the higher seed in game one, selecting blue side. And honestly, game one is just a full case study on how to break down evil geniuses at every stage of the game. Reduce impact's influence to nothing. Make sure no neutrals can be stacked by evil geniuses. Zone inspired and Jojo Pune away from anything that can be done. And never give Danny a chance to farm gold from turrets. Evil geniuses had been read like an easy book, and the Royals show no signs of slowing down that kind of game plan. The geniuses, for their part, do manage to find some solid vision control and attempt to some proactive plays, but as the tempo slowly increased, it became harder to navigate, and the Royals really just need to close out games faster. This will eventually be punished at some point, but for now, from this game, the geniuses should think about pushing or pivoting towards a bot-centered draft and giving more team fight options for themselves. Take a look at the gold graph here for this. Looking at just game one's gold graph in general. Right? Slow, steady increase that honestly, by the time that we hit the 10K mark around 21 minutes, the Royals could have had full control to end the game. And then like even 5 minutes later when they get to closer to 15K, and then like 7 minutes later when they get to 17K, it feels like they're playing it extra safe, but they've caught out literally the thing that evil geniuses require the most for their success and didn't give them a single ounce of it ever. So let's take a look at how the game 2 went. The losing side always getting side selection. Evil geniuses select the blue side, and then the Royals are stuck with the red side here. And this was, for game 2, this was a lot more competitive out of the geniuses, who take some reckless map movements out of the Royal Never Give Up and punish them appropriately. The comfort of team fight allowed a lot more coordination to come from them, but since they didn't play through Danny and mostly through Inspired, the Royals could find easier avenues to attack. Granted, not a bad idea to do so. They were playing with a Viego, and a lot of the reset potentials work out, but they tend to flourish more when they're playing through Danny. It also helps to mention that the Royals look like they wanted to speed up the pace of the game. Really good to see, but it's a thing that they don't usually play under. They even looked ready to end the game on the first inhibitor that was broken, but opted out since they didn't have the lead for it, which was like an appropriate time to posture for an end and then decide to reset. But, you know, to me, it's still a little weird to see that from the Royals. Why go for more risky high-tempo plays while the gold is close than when you have like a massive lead like previously in game 1? Evil geniuses do find solid avenues of attack around Herald and Baron, properly baiting team fights on their terms. It becomes a little bit more competitive from that. And eventually, the Royals hold stronger map pressure overall, and picks that provide neutral control and end the game pretty cleanly. If the geniuses want to win, they need to stick to comfort and reduce Bin's influence on the game overall. Let's take a look at this gold graph here. And you can tell immediately stark difference between the two. The game is noticeably longer, and the geniuses have found avenues to gain back gold or to neutralize a whole lot of it. And even during the late game, in avenues that usually the Royals have full control under, right? The geniuses have found management, like I mentioned, ways to navigate around Heralds and Baron plays that force the Royals to come in to their terms of team fighting. And this kind of play is exactly what a lot of EG fans wanted. But, you know, it still comes at the price of the fact that, like, their vision is not quite there. The Royals, like, usually recompose themselves and are able to go off. But out of all of the times for the Royals to also try to speed up the tempo and pace of the game and to try to close out games with, like, very small leads, this is not the right evaluation. Makes it really easy for me to see that, like, the Royals are probably not the best at closing out games or when they can close out games. They just so happen to have massive leads when they do. Let's take a look at Game 3. Game 3 is interesting. Game 3 here, Evil Geniuses still lost the previous one, so they take side selection, sticking to blue side. And this is the series. This game showed me the series was really interesting in terms of how they navigated picks and bans and drafting, opting to, like, stick to the same kind of patterns overall, but, like, the Royals choose to, like, change the red side ban to target Vulcan. It's noticeable here. Now, the geniuses find opportunities to punish some of the rougher tendencies out of the Royals' late game macro choices. What looks like overly cautious attempts to end the game or reveal to be more inexperienced ways to close out games in most scenarios. And the genius punish it super heavily this game. The multiple Baron fumbles, the poor target selection right before the Elder Drake. All that to say is, if the geniuses had gotten leads early game and were just slightly more coordinated in their map movement, we might have seen a struggling Royal Never Give Up for the entire series. But, you know, instead we saw two very strong team fighting teams where one had to play with vision disadvantage and inconsistent approach, and the other one's usually the first to the objective to set up the fights that they wanted. This was by no means a series that people expected to be close. Not at all. But Evil Geniuses showed that they could be competitive and showed the cracks in the way that Royal Never Give Up approach that tomorrow's series winner could exploit in the grand finals, of which I hope the Royals play to their newfound early game strengths that they're showing us, and get better at closing out their games. Let's take a look at the gold graph over this. And, like, immediately you notice something stark. This is the gold lead, like the way that the Royals end their gold is smaller and smaller after every game. There is a noticeable punishment that's happening. Now, the geniuses never gain a gold lead, but you can tell at moments where they gain Baron, they shrink it so much. They do everything to nullify it to the point where you hit 40 minutes into the game, the gold lead means nothing, right? It's only an approach of how you do team fights and how you navigate them. And since the Royals still ended up having the vision advantage overall, there were more opportunities for them to find picks and set up just the overall win at the whole thing. Which is super unfortunate because the Evil Geniuses had properly targeted the weaknesses of the Royals when it came to ending fights, how to find the closing conditions for their drafts, and they just didn't have any of the proper setup to, like, succeed in the early game from it, or succeed from it using the early game, which is unfortunate. And as Royal Never Give Up, or the Royals move on to the finals here, I do want to start talking about how Evil Geniuses as an organization here, as a team, going into MSI, came from a hot streak out of nowhere, really upsetting a whole bunch of teams and still coming in with a lot of questions about how will they navigate internationally. They had mentioned that they were coming in to learn to eventually just slowly grow and adapt. They found all of the avenues to beat teams that were seeded lower or expected to be seeded lower, but never quite catching the games that they needed to against higher seeded teams. Up until they beat T1, and then there was like glimmer of hope for a little bit. And I do want to emphasize that this is a glimmer of hope. I do think that the playoffs themselves lended a lot of their ability to succeed in terms of like learning how to adapt. The first thing I look at when it comes to playoffs is how they adapt from game to game and series to series, because that's the primary thing that comes from international competition. It isn't just, is your style better? Do you have a better read on the meta? It's more like, if you fail on your style and the read to the meta, can you change those on the fly fast enough to be successful in the international scene? And Evil Genius has said, we've got that in spades, but it still needs work. And honestly, that's fantastic. Out of a North American team who has so much to work with overall, most of the time when it comes to these international competitions halfway into the year at MSI, the North American team is like, oh, this is the strongest team that they've got going. They've got a nice style. They could be competitive, but then they get eliminated and everybody's like, well, that was disappointing. I don't think anybody feels disappointed at all by the performance that Evil Geniuses have brought up. And in fact, I think from this performance and how quickly and efficiently they were learning to improve, even if it wasn't enough to get a win, they had such a disadvantage starting in base compared to like the rest of the top 3 teams that we were expecting to like make semifinals and finals and all the rest of that, that the fact that they came within some touching distance within this entire time, the same amount of time that the other teams got, is fantastic. And I really cannot wait to see how they move on from this going into summer, and if they become one of the 3 teams that represent North America going forward, because I would love to see this just like catapult them up as like a flagship team for the region. Otherwise, the things that they bring here will likely help improve North America a smidgens. I don't have a lot of faith on that, but at least a smidgens I do. Otherwise, this is a fantastic showing for a lot of them as the first timers in terms of international competition, and for like the 2 rookies who are there for like at its go in general. I just think that this was just a nice team to watch play, even if there was not very much expectations or hope that they would go far from this. So 10 out of 10, solid job. Hope to see you guys again in the summer playoffs doing as well as you did in spring. Finally, let's just talk about a couple of things. One, I'm just going to go over the fact that the meta currently has stayed fairly stable so far. There's been no changes. Best of 5 sometimes bring a little bit of spice and flavor. Maybe there's something that you found, but like at this current moment, it's still the same top 5 that are the same top 5. What I want to go to is a notable thing that the Evil Geniuses had brought up is the very awkward approaches to very large mistakes in terms of how the Royals close out games. There seems to be an inability to understand what their limits are and overcompensating how they want to approach the closing of a game or the win conditions of their draft to when they have an unquestionable setup for an ending, right? They've been aced. There's like 30 to 40 seconds on the timers, and then let's go. Other than that, it feels super awkward to look at an RNG with a huge substantial lead just reset instead of like pressuring properly to end a game. And then this series, they're trying to do something different. They try to like speed up the game like 2 games in a row, and it wound up being their longest games ever. And so do they just really back in? Because they're facing off against 2 teams that are gonna sniff this out. T1 understands how to mess with RNG, right? They know how to play their late game style fantastically. They know how to nullify early games that RNG seems to be taking a much better liking to. and are much better at closing out games. Same with G2. G2 is fantastic at closing out games, and I'm here just wondering, is this is the win rate that RNG have here? Is the Royals just gonna like fumble their approach to the semifinal, to like the finals? I hope not, because if that's their clearest weakness, and they are not that substantially better, they're more consistent, but they're not that substantially better at any other stage of the game. The only thing that G2 and T1 have shown to be consistent at is knowing when to close out a game. And that worries me a little bit. But we'll see. Based on how tomorrow's series ends, my thought process on like how RNG are going to navigate the finals may be different. In fact, it could be different based off of if T1 and G2 have a completely different play style. I doubt it. But if they have like a noticeable change to their approach. But those are my thoughts, right? I want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Did you think that Evil Geniuses was competitive enough and that they were able to show at least some weaknesses in the Royals' approach to the game? Do you think that they're going to fumble in the finals, or do you think they're just par for the course? This is just this tiny little hiccup that they didn't even lose the games of the series, so it doesn't matter, that they're going to be consistent throughout in the next series when they play off against the winner of T1 versus G2. Any and all of your thoughts I'd love to hear in the comments down below. And if you like this type of content, leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate everybody who has been watching so far. It's been a fantastic ride, and we've only got 2 days left to the MSI. And so I'll see you tomorrow for the semifinals and the penultimate day of the tournament. Bye.